And welcome back to Inside West Virginia Politics. All of a sudden, the race for governor in West Virginia is getting a bit more crowded. We know, of course, the Republican incumbent Jim Justice won the primary. Democrat Ben Salango, a county commissioner here in Kanawha County, is the nominee of his party. And joining us right now is an independent in the race. He's Delegate Marshall Wilson, who represents Berkeley County, has for 2 terms, and you are running for governor. Marshall, why are you running for governor as an independent?
Well, Mark, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Effectively, what it comes down to is that, as far as I can tell, based on my research and frankly my personal knowledge of Governor Justice, neither of the primary party candidates is focused on constitutional governance, on protecting and upholding the individual natural rights of each individual citizen of the state. And the problem with that is actually the only valid reason for any government to exist, is to uphold and defend the individual natural rights of each of its citizens. And what we've got here is we've got a bunch of people who think that the government is the solution to everyone's problem, when the fact of the matter is, more often than not, the government is the cause of the problems. Specifically, the most recent example I can think of, and you probably are aware that I have an action pending in the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals against Governor Justice to compel him, it's a writ of mandamus, or a petition for a writ of mandamus, to compel him to actually function according to his constitutionally mandated functions in the West Virginia Constitution. And the simple fact of the matter is that his imposition of statewide shutdowns of certain businesses, compelling people to stay in their homes, that sort of thing is completely unconstitutional and is completely contrary to the principles upon which the United States and the state of West Virginia were founded. And, somebody has to do something about this. Someone has to stand up and say, we are founded on these principles. This is who we are. The Constitution matters, and the government has only the right to function within these constitutional parameters. At a bare minimum, Governor Justice should have called in the legislature to consult with the people's representatives before he made a bunch of decisions that destroyed businesses and off-track people's lives.
I should point out you were twice elected as a Republican, but you've never been shy about criticizing the leadership of your own party, whether it's the governor, the speaker, or anyone else.
No, sir, and I want to be very clear about this. The reason that I've been a Republican since I was in college, which was a long, long time ago, is because I believed that the Republican Party was about small government, about accountable government, about fiscal responsibility. That's why I was a Republican. And then it became very clear to me through my 4 years of service as a delegate that I simply was mistaken, that that's not what the West Virginia Republican Party is about. And I actually started at sort of a quest where I started at the Berkeley County level, where I was a member of the Republican Executive Committee, and I tried to address those issues to bring a little more ethical consideration to the discussion. And I was told at each level to shut up. And I finally got to the point where I was speaking face to face with the chairwoman of the West Virginia Republican Party, and she basically told me that my opinion meant nothing. And she said, you think just because you're a delegate you can come in here and make these accusations? I said, no ma'am, I believe because I am a registered Republican voter in the state of West Virginia, I have a right to hold my elected leadership, and the members of the leadership of the West Virginia Republican Party is elected by the Republican people, by the Republican voters. I said, because I am a voter, a registered Republican voter, I have a right to hold you accountable to our shared principles. And she effectively told me that I didn't know what I was talking about and I needed to go home. So I went home. And I decided that I needed to do these things as an independent. So before the 2020 session, yes, sir.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt, but if you were governor today, would you reopen the state completely and have all businesses opening and operating as normal if you were governor today?
I would not reopen the state. I would simply rescind the closing of the state and allow the people to do what they think is right. This is not the governor's business. The governor doesn't have a right to reopen the state because the governor never had the right to close the state. So in effect, yes, the state would be reopened, but I want to be very clear about the fact that it would not be my authority to reopen the state simply because the governor has no right to close the state. Now, propose measures to keep people safer? Absolutely. Provide executive branch support to those operations? Absolutely. Compel people to shut down their businesses? Not a chance.
All right.
That is completely unacceptable.
All right, Delegate Wilson, real quick, we're down to about 15 seconds. Give your website or Facebook page. Where can people find out more about Marshall Wilson, independent for governor of West Virginia?
Well, my website's still in development, but the Facebook page that you need to go to is Marshall, M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L, 4, F-O-R-W-V, at Marshall4WV. Enter that in the search bar and Facebook, and it'll bring you right to me.
All right, Delegate Marshall Wilson. We'll have more after this break. Stay with us.